Michael Johnson Jr. is out, but don't fret, another quarterback might take his place.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, and of course, we're always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, it was announced on social media by Michael Johnson Jr. himself, Syracuse's backup quarterback a year ago, is entering the transfer portal. But another quarterback, Zach Gibson, is visiting campus, so perhaps that's the replacement right there, and we'll talk about that here on Locked On Syracuse. Plus, later on in the show, Syracuse is getting a visit from defensive back Julian Neal out of Fresno State, and he could really help Syracuse's cornerback room. All that and more here on this edition of Locked On Syracuse. But before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. First off, I'm kind of surprised that Michael Johnson Jr. is entering the transfer portal. And the reason why I am surprised, and ultimately why I predicted it would be Jakhari Williams, is mainly because Michael Johnson Jr. is the son of co-offensive coordinator and tight ends coach Michael Johnson. So I thought because of the father-son connection, he transferred in from FAU last season, he would ultimately stay with Syracuse. But alas, he announced on social media earlier today that he is entering the transfer portal, and we wish him nothing but the best here on Locked On Syracuse. Let's go over the backstory of Michael Johnson Jr. and assess whether or not this is a big loss, a medium loss, or a minor loss for Syracuse football. And before we get to that, I want to hear from you in the comment section below. What was your reaction to seeing Michael Johnson Jr. entering the transfer portal? Or maybe this is your first time hearing of it, in which case, that's why I'm here to supply you with the latest going on with Syracuse football. So backstory, Michael Johnson Jr. transferred to Syracuse from FAU last spring, and he served as the backup quarterback to Kyle McCord in the 2024 season. Now, thankfully, Kyle McCord remained healthy for the entire season, so we did not really see much of Michael Johnson Jr. This is no disrespect to Michael Johnson Jr., but Kyle McCord was the starter. He was really good, and best part is he was healthy for the entire season. So Michael Johnson, he only threw 3 passes the entire year, all of which came in the Holy Cross blowout. So Michael Johnson Jr. then entered the offseason as the highest ranking quarterback on Syracuse's roster, but that was expected to change. But as soon as the bowl game was over, here's what was going on. Kyle McCord is out of eligibility, but he was fighting to get another year, and it didn't matter anyway because he would eventually enter the NFL draft. They still had Jakhari Williams on the roster, but Michael Johnson Jr. had already beat out Jakhari Williams for the backup job. And yeah, they had true freshmen coming in, Rich Bellin and Luke Carney, but you would assume that a veteran like Michael Johnson Jr. would be ahead of those guys on the depth chart. So he was the highest ranking guy heading into the offseason. Now, that changed. Even with Kyle McCord saying, screw trying to fight getting another year, I'm just going to go to the NFL draft, Syracuse brings in LSU transfer Rickie Collins. We kind of figured they were going to add a quarterback in the transfer portal. It ends up being Rickie Collins. He ends up getting the starting role. And Fran Brown hints in that same press conference that he wouldn't be surprised if a quarterback was going to enter the transfer portal because Rickie Collins won the job. And if you did a little process of elimination, it's not going to be the true freshman that just came here. It was probably going to be one of Michael Johnson Jr. or Jakhari Williams. But like I said off the top, I am a little surprised it's Michael Johnson Jr. because he is the son of Michael Johnson Sr. However, then the spring game happens. The spring game happens, and it's very clear that Jakhari Williams is the backup quarterback for Syracuse football, and that would make Michael Johnson Jr. the third string quarterback in his final year of collegiate eligibility. Now you start to put the pieces together, and it makes sense that Michael Johnson Jr. would enter the transfer portal. And you'd figure whoever was going to lose out on the backup role was probably going to enter the transfer portal, and that ends up being Michael Johnson Jr. Truthfully, this isn't really that big of a loss for Syracuse football, and it's for a variety of reasons. Number one, I already said it, but Michael Johnson Jr. only has 1 year of eligibility remaining. Even though I predicted that Jakhari Williams was probably going to be the one of the two to enter the transfer portal, I was hoping, hoping is kind of not maybe the greatest word, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. Jakhari Williams has 4 years of eligibility remaining. He is a redshirt freshman, and that's what's listed on the Syracuse website. So you figure there's potential there. There is room for growth. So ideally, you don't want to lose a young quarterback to the transfer portal. You really don't want to lose anyone, if we're being honest with you, if I'm being honest with you, but you have to kind of pick at that point. Michael Johnson Jr. only has 1 more year of eligibility. He hasn't thrown many passes in college. So the potential, the ability right now, I was hoping they would keep Jakhari Williams. And that's why it's not really that big of a deal that Michael Johnson Jr. ultimately enters the portal, because Rickie Collins is your quarterback 1. And as of right now, Jakhari Williams is the quarterback 2 for Syracuse football. Number 2, why this is not really that big of a deal, is there's depth behind Michael Johnson Jr. Already mentioned Jakhari Williams, but you also got 2 true freshmen that are coming in. You got Luke Carney and you got Rich Bellin. And then we'll talk about it in the next segment. Syracuse has Zach Gibson visiting campus, another quarterback from Georgia State. So you are losing perhaps a lot of veteran leadership maybe in Michael Johnson Jr., but overall, this is not that big of a loss for Syracuse football. This is not one of those losses where you're sitting here saying, man, I predicted Syracuse is going to win 8 games next year, but now they lost Michael Johnson Jr. They're going to only win 6 games. Doesn't really impact it too much. He was projected to, at this point, be Syracuse's third string quarterback. Again, wish him nothing but the best here on Locked On Syracuse. And I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Michael Johnson Jr. entering the transfer portal and Jakhari Williams getting the backup job for Syracuse? I want to hear from you in the comments section below. But will Jakhari Williams have his backup job for long? Things are getting a little interesting on the Syracuse quarterback front because Zach Gibson is visiting campus. I'll explain more next here on Locked On Syracuse. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we're going to stick with the quarterback conversation here because Michael Johnson Jr. is out. He is entering the transfer portal, but there was kind of a little precursor to this, which occurred yesterday, Sunday, April 13th, to be exact. 24/7 sports reporter Bryce Kuhn reported that Syracuse is getting a visit, which is occurring today on April 14th, from Georgia State quarterback Zach Gibson, and that might be the reason why Michael Johnson Jr. is ultimately entering the transfer portal, or the two are just going hand in hand. But regardless, let's talk about Zach Gibson, and if he were to commit to Syracuse, what he would bring to the Orange. About Zach Gibson, well, He is 6'3", 210 pounds. He has one more year of college eligibility remaining, and he's actually been in college since 2019, and he has been with 3 different schools. He started his career at Akron from 2019 to 2021, and at Akron, he played in 17 games. He threw for about 2,500 total yards, 15 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and 61% completion percentage. Not bad over at Akron. Following his time at Akron, he then goes to Georgia Tech, and in 2022, he plays in 6 games as a backup quarterback, and he doesn't play at all in 2023, so then he transfers to Georgia State in 2024, where he plays in 7 games, throws for about 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a 68% completion percentage. Is this a big deal, medium deal, or minor deal? I want to hear from you first in the comments section below. What are your thoughts on Zach Gibson visiting Syracuse, the quarterback from Georgia State? And do you think that Syracuse needs to add another quarterback in the transfer portal? Comment your thoughts in the comments section below. Now, honestly, in my opinion, this would be a minor addition to Syracuse's quarterback room in terms of his actual ability. I don't think Zach Gibson would come here and threaten Rickie Collins' starting job, and I don't think he would come here to be the backup quarterback either to Rickie Collins. I think it's still going to be Jakhari Williams. And even if he somehow is the backup quarterback, there's no reason why he would block the young quarterbacks from playing. If the young quarterbacks are not good enough to beat him out, I don't know what to tell you. All right. So this would just be, I think, a minor move in terms of ability getting Zach Gibson. So why would Syracuse have interest in Zach Gibson? I mean, they have Rickie Collins as the starter. They have Jakhari Williams as the presumed backup. They have multiple true freshmen coming in. They have another quarterback commit already in the class of 2026. Why are they interested in Zach Gibson? Well, my guess is the experience that he would provide, which I alluded to with Michael Johnson Jr. Even though he hadn't thrown a lot of collegiate passes, he's been in college forever, and he was the backup quarterback for Syracuse a year ago. So he's been in the room as well and got to learn from Kyle McCord. Take that for what it's worth. Now he's gone. So you probably need a quarterback in there with experience. And when you look at Syracuse's quarterback room, Rickie Collins, the starter, has only thrown 7 career collegiate passes. Then you go down the depth chart and you look at Jakhari Williams and Luke Carney and Rich Bellin. They've thrown 0 collegiate passes. Their only experience is in the Syracuse spring game. That's it. So it makes sense why Syracuse would have interest in a guy like Zach Gibson from Georgia State, because he's also been in the ACC. He was at Georgia Tech for a couple of years. But he has thrown 625 passes in his collegiate career. So he could potentially be a mentor for Syracuse football's quarterback room. However, I think this is going to be quite tricky to get Gibson to ultimately commit here. And here's why, all right? Don't get me wrong. If he ends up committing to Syracuse, I would not be surprised, and I would be happy if he commits to Syracuse. But if he doesn't commit to Syracuse and say he goes to maybe a smaller school, it'll likely be because that smaller school can offer him more playing time. Again, he presumably only has one more year of eligibility remaining. And ideally, he'd probably want to play in that final year of eligibility. Well, at Syracuse, is he really going to get a lot of playing time? I don't know. I mean, I don't think so, to be honest with you. Would he be the backup quarterback? Probably not. He's probably the 3rd string if he were to come to Syracuse. There's probably a low-level school out there that would give him at least a backup job, if not a starting job. And he's an athlete. He probably wants to play. So if they don't get him, Zach Gibson from Georgia State, don't come at me with all the pitchfork, or not at me, but don't come at Syracuse football with all the pitchforks saying, how could we not get this guy? This is insane. It's probably because he wants to play. I think a year ago, Syracuse was going after a quarterback from Pitt, I forgot his name, a backup quarterback from Pitt. I thought they might get him, but then they didn't. I think they actually lost out on him to Georgia State, of all schools. Why? Because Georgia State could offer him more opportunity, and Syracuse already had Kyle McCord. So whether he commits or not, I would not be surprised, but that's the latest with Syracuse's quarterback room. Michael Johnson Jr. is out. He announced it himself on social media, and Zach Gibson from Georgia State is visiting Syracuse today, Monday, April 14th. I want to hear from you in the comments section below. What do you think of Syracuse's quarterback room, and do you think the Orange need to add to its quarterback room? Now, coming up, we're not going to talk about quarterbacks anymore, but we're going to stick with football and the transfer portal because the Orange are going after one of the top defensive backs in the portal in Julian Neal. All that and more coming up on Locked On Syracuse. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. You need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, and now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. One of the top players remaining in this transfer portal cycle has visited Syracuse football per multiple reports. Let's talk about Fresno State defensive back Julian Neal. 24/7 Sports is incredibly high on Julian Neal. They have him as a top 70 overall player in the transfer portal. That also includes players that entered in the fall portal window, and he's the top defensive player remaining on 24/7 Sports. Now, to tell both sides of the story, On3 is considerably lower on Julian Neal. They don't even have him as a top 300 overall transfer. That being said, if you just put the ranking aside with Julian Neal, I believe that this would be a fine addition for Syracuse football. Dare I say, a really good addition for Syracuse football. And before we really dive into Julian Neal, I want to hear from you in the comments section below. Would you be excited if Syracuse lands Julian Neal? Comment yes or no, and tell me why in the comments section below. The good news for you all, if you really want Julian Neal, is that there is a direct connection between Syracuse and the Fresno State defensive back. I have said so many times here on this podcast that money is not everything in the transfer portal. It definitely matters, but when you're in the ballpark, other things can take over. Playing time, relationships, proximity to home, all those factors can come into play when a player decides where they want to go when they're in the transfer portal. In this case, we have some really good news. Syracuse defensive analyst Kevin Coyle was the defensive coordinator over at Fresno State since 2021 per their website. And guess what? Julian Neal, as we're about to get into, has been at Fresno State since 2021. So there is a direct connection between Julian Neal and Syracuse's new defensive analyst, Kevin Coyle. Julian Neal is 6'2". He's 200 pounds and presumably entering his final year of college eligibility. He has played 4 seasons over at Fresno State. He played from 2021 to 2024, and this past season he played in 12 games. He had 2 interceptions, 6 passes defended, and he got a Pro Football Focus grade for the season of 70.3. Now, you might be asking yourself, Jackson, what does that mean, and why should I care? What does that 70.3 mean? Well, with Pro Football Focus, they grade players on a scale of 0 to 100, and If you get a 100, that is the highest grade possible. And if you get a 0, that is the lowest grade possible. So higher the number, the better. And this is not like you going to school and you get a 70 in a class or a test, and that is barely passing a class. No, in this scenario, 70 is actually a pretty good grade to get on Pro Football Focus. Here's more that you need to know about Julian Neal, all right? He was originally committed to Stanford in the transfer portal, but Stanford, and we don't have to dive too deep into this, they fired their head coach, which means that every player can then enter the transfer portal. And that is honestly, I think we can all agree, a pretty fair rule. If a school fires their coach, you can enter the portal at that point. You get an extension. And Julian Neal was granted his release from the program, and that is why he is back in the transfer portal. There are many reasons why he helped Syracuse football, but the main reason why he helped Syracuse is because the Orange need a cornerback. They need experience in the secondary, and they need a good player as well. And I think Julian Neal fits all three of those categories. Syracuse's cornerback room is incredibly young, and it showed during the spring game. You can go on Syracuse.com and find at least some of the stats and some of the observations out there, but they committed a lot of penalties. They got beat on some contested balls. So Syracuse could use another starting corner. Now, they have true freshman Demetrius Samuel, who could be really good right off the bat. And I think we all have high hopes for Demetrius Samuel, who's one of the best Syracuse football recruits in the last 20 years. So he could be really good. And then he got true sophomore Davian Kerr, who started for Syracuse during the spring game. Both guys are talented, but they really lack experience, specifically Demetrius Samuel, because he's just a 17-year-old true freshman. At least Davian Kerr was here last year, and he played some games, especially down the stretch for the Orange. If Julian Neal were to commit to Syracuse, he instantly becomes the team's cornerback one and a direct replacement from what Syracuse had a year ago, which was Clarence Lewis from Notre Dame. And also, it knocks everyone's role down just a little bit. That's a good thing, by the way. When you get a really good player and all of a sudden you're presumed number one and number two all of a sudden get knocked down to your number two and number three, that's a good thing. So overall, Julian Neal, I like the fit. Syracuse could use a corner. They could use a good corner. They can use some experience. He fits all three of those categories. I want to hear from you in the comments section below. How would you feel if Julian Neal commits to Syracuse? I think it would be a terrific get for the Orange. As far as what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future, tomorrow we will go back to talking about Syracuse basketball because there's some steam picking up between Florida State transfer forward Jerry Dang and Syracuse. He is reportedly on campus today visiting. Plus, more coverage of the spring portal window for Syracuse football. In case you all do not know, it opens on April 16th and lasts until April 25th. It gives every player around the country another chance to enter the transfer portal and find a new home. I do want to do another portal guide. It seemed to be helpful for you all when I did it for basketball. If I can release it Wednesday at midnight, if I have the time, I will. If not, that will be a podcast that gets released on Wednesday. So that's what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future. Jerry Dang and more spring football portal coverage. Of course, we will monitor Zach Gibson and Julian Neal as they have visited Syracuse. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. As your favorite collegiate players get ready for the next level, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. And you can find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. And if you really enjoy this podcast, if you could just do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications so you know when I am dropping the next podcast. And also, if you could just tell one or two of your closest Syracuse friends about the Locked On Syracuse podcast, that would be much appreciated. It helps the channel grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And folks, I will see you all again soon.